So I want you to picture something. You are sitting at a scattered desk, right? It's the end of just a long, totally exhausting day.
Yeah, and you've got that glow of the screen just casting this pale, harsh light across the room.
Exactly. And I mean, you have been in constant motion since the absolute moment you woke up. You've responded to emergencies, you've consumed this massive volume of information, tweaked all your plans, reorganized your digital ledgers, and just put out a vast multitude of tiny, urgent fires.
Right, just putting out fires all day long.
Yeah, but then, as the house goes quiet, this heavy realization sort of settles right into your chest.
Yeah.
And the realization is that nothing tangible has actually moved forward.
Oh, it is a profound and I think uniquely modern kind of exhaustion.
It really is.
Because you feel completely drained, right? You're running on fumes. But if someone were to come up and ask you what you actually built today, you would have absolutely nothing monumental to show for it.
Yeah, exactly. It's the really frustrating difference between being merely busy and, being truly productive. Because if we could look inside your mind in that exact moment, we would see this chaotic array of open tabs, just half-finished thoughts, aspirations that you've bookmarked but never actually initiated.
You're essentially carrying the cognitive weight of 1,000 potential futures.
Right. But in the physical world, your hands haven't laid a single brick. And, we're exploring the behavioral psychology and the performance architecture behind why this actually happens today. Because this isn't just like a simple time management issue.
No, not at all. It's a structural issue with how we operate as humans.
Right.
And the psychological toll of that structural issue is severe.
Oh, absolutely severe.
Because what follows that realization of stagnation is a very specific kind of emotional whiplash.
Yes, the whiplash.
You recognize the lack of progress, and in response, your brain desperately tries to rescue you. So you experience this enormous sudden surge of motivation.
And it usually happens super late at night, doesn't it?
Oh, almost always in the dead of night. You sit there, you're completely fed up with your own inertia, and you swear that tomorrow everything changes. You construct this massive, uncompromising new plan.
It's like, I'm going to wake up before dawn.
Right. I am going to master every discipline. I'm going to rewrite the very fabric of my existence.
Oh, man. I know that midnight energy so well. I mean, we all do, right? It feels entirely real in the moment. Actually, it feels like a genuine transformation has already happened just because you felt the magnitude of the desire.
Exactly. You get this rush of adrenaline.
Yeah, you write down a new routine and you go to sleep feeling like a completely different person.
But then, and this is the trap, the dawn of the cycle arrives, the sun comes up.
Reality hits.
The immediate friction of reality pushes back hard. You feel tired. The alarm goes off. And the temperature in the room is just a bit too cold.
Or an unexpected demand arises from a family member, or a colleague needs something urgently.
Precisely. And by the afternoon, that monumental midnight motivation has just completely evaporated. And that familiar heavy inertia returns.
It's just devastating.
It is. And the challenge we face here isn't just that this cycle wastes our precious time. I mean, the true danger, the hidden cost, is that this looping quietly and systematically erodes your belief in yourself.
Because you're breaking your own trust.
Yes, every single time you generate that massive intention and then fail to act on it, you are feeding a silent narrative that you are fundamentally incapable of change.
Wow. Yeah, it feels like sailing a ship by frantically adjusting the sails to every tiny, unpredictable gust of wind.
That's a great analogy.
Like you feel a breeze of inspiration, so you throw the sails open, a storm of doubt rolls in, you tie everything down in a complete panic. You're in constant, frantic motion, but you have completely forgotten how to just steer by the stars.
You're just reacting.
Yeah, exactly. Why are we so addicted to the wind? I mean, why are we so obsessed with the immediate, unpredictable weather of our lives?
Well, we are addicted to the wind because the wind is loud, it's visible, it demands our immediate sensory attention.
Right.
To steer by the stars, like you said, requires you to trust something distant and silent and incredibly slow. And human biology is deeply, deeply uncomfortable with the silent and the slow.
Because of how we evolved.
Neurologically speaking, yes. Our brains evolved to prioritize immediate environmental shifts. A sudden rustle in the bushes in the distant past required immediate attention. Long-term strategic planning did not.
So we are completely biased toward the immediate.
Absolutely. So our mission in this exploration today is to map out a radical framework for completely unhooking from that external chaos.
Okay, I love that.
We are going to look at the underlying mechanics of how to build an internal system that is so relentlessly resilient, so structurally sound, that forward progress stops being a matter of fleeting motivation and just becomes an absolute inevitability.
We're going to examine what happens when you stop reacting to the world and start quietly constructing your own.
Yes. And to do that, we have to start by completely dismantling how you evaluate reality.
Okay, where do we start?
I want you to imagine two distinct, powerful forces that are tracking the trajectory of your existence. Two completely different rhythms running simultaneously.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
The first force is what we can call the surface force.
The weather, basically.
Precisely, the weather. The surface force is entirely external. It is highly visible. It is the immediate feedback you get from the world.
Like social validation.
Social validation, a sudden influx of resources, a passing compliment.
Mm.
Or, conversely, a sudden rejection, a public criticism, or a temporary failure.
So it's very reactive.
Right. The defining characteristic of the surface force is wild volatility. It spikes sharply upward, and it crashes rapidly downward. It moves constantly.
And it changes based on a vast multitude of factors that are entirely outside of your direct control.
Exactly. And if we are being honest with ourselves, this surface force is the only thing we have been conditioned to watch.
It is the loudest thing in the room.
It really is. When the surface force spikes, when you get that immediate external win, like a post getting a massive amount of attention, or receiving unexpected praise from a boss, it feels like the ultimate confirmation that you are on the right path.
It feels like the truth.
It feels like truth, but it possesses almost zero predictive power over where your life will actually be over a macro timeline.
Wow. Okay, so what's the second force then?
Beneath that chaotic storm is the second force. We will call it the core foundation. This is your intrinsic value.
So if the first one is the weather, this is the climate.
The climate. Your core foundation is the actual internalized quality of your skills, your cultivated mindsets, your emotional regulation, and your unyielding daily processes.
It's the stuff nobody sees.
Exactly. Unlike the surface force, the core foundation is entirely invisible to the outside world. It does not send you notifications. It does not generate immediate applause.
And it moves imperceptibly slowly, right?
So slowly. It rarely spikes, and if properly maintained, it rarely crashes. It is the steady, quiet accumulation of competence.
Because it is the climate, it is just so easy to ignore. I mean, on a day-to-day basis, you don't feel the climate changing. You only feel the rain on your face or the sun on your skin.
Right.
But the climate is the only honest measure of your trajectory.
And here is the unbreakable law that binds these two forces together. It is called the reversion principle.
The reversion principle. Okay, what is that?
The fundamental truth is that the surface force will always, eventually, and inevitably revert to the exact level of the core foundation.
Oh, wow.
Gravity always wins.
Okay, let's stop and look at the mechanics of this, because this feels huge.
Yeah.
You are saying that if the surface force, the external weather of my life, suddenly spikes,
Yes.
if I experience a massive sudden stroke of luck or temporary attention, but my core foundation hasn't actually grown to support it, you're saying that spike is essentially an illusion.
It is worse than an illusion, actually. It is a dangerous vulnerability.
That's so.
Because the reversion principle dictates that without the intrinsic value to sustain it, that external spike will inevitably collapse back down to the reality of your foundation.
It corrects itself.
It always corrects itself.
Yeah.
Think of the well-documented phenomenon of individuals who receive sudden, unearned windfalls of immense wealth or sudden public attention, only to find themselves utterly destitute or disgraced shortly after.
Right, because the surface spiked, but the foundation remained completely hollow.
Exactly. They lacked the financial literacy, the emotional regulation, the structural habits, and reality corrected the imbalance.
But wait, I have to push back here a little bit.
Sure.
Isn't it entirely natural to celebrate a massive spike in success? Like, we are human. If something incredible and unexpected happens, how do we stop ourselves from being seduced by a sudden, massive win?
It's tough.
Are we supposed to just walk around like unfeeling robots, completely indifferent to our own success?
No, it is entirely natural to feel the joy. Absolutely. The issue isn't the emotion itself. The issue is the psychological trap the emotion sets for you.
A trap.
Yes. When the surface spikes, your brain whispers a very seductive lie. It says, "You have arrived. You have cracked the code. You can stop working so hard now."
Oh, I see. A sudden spike convinces you that the invisible foundational work is no longer necessary.
Precisely. You stop building the processes that actually generate value because the external world is currently rewarding you without them.
You waste the most crucial window of favorable conditions.
You mistake a lucky breeze for your own sailing skill.
Wow. And then, when the inevitable collapse happens, you are actually worse off than before because your foundation has atrophied while you were busy celebrating the weather.
You stopped practicing the basics because you thought you had outgrown them.
Yeah.
And, the reversion principle works in the opposite direction too, which is arguably even more vital to understand.
How does that work?
Imagine your core foundation is steadily, quietly rising. You are doing the daily work. You are expanding your mind. You are refining your skills. But suddenly, the surface force crashes.
You face a challenging season of external bad luck.
Right. A project fails publicly. Resources dry up. A key relationship dissolves.
That is the exact moment the overwhelming majority of people simply throw their hands up and quit. They assume the universe is sending them a sign.
They quit because they mistake a temporary dip in the weather for a permanent verdict on their climate.
Right.
But if your foundation is strong, that crash is merely temporary noise. The reversion principle guarantees that the surface will eventually be forced to rise back up to match your intrinsic value.
Reality will correct upward.
Yes. Competence over a macro timeline is undeniable.
So the goal isn't to control the weather. The goal is to become genuinely, fundamentally neutral to it.
Exactly.
To look at a massive spike in success and say, interesting weather today, I will go back to laying my bricks. And to look at a catastrophic external failure and say, interesting weather today, I will go back to laying my bricks.
That neutrality is the ultimate advantage. But, and this is a huge but, it is incredibly difficult to achieve because we are fighting a passage of eras of evolutionary programming.
We're wired against it.
We have a profound addiction problem. The human brain is biologically wired to seek immediate dopamine hits, and it finds those hits by relentlessly monitoring the surface.
Let's get into the actual mechanism of that, because when we think of dopamine, we usually think of pleasure. We think of eating a great meal or receiving a compliment. Dopamine is the reward chemical, right?
That's the common misconception, yeah.
But what you are suggesting is that we are addicted to monitoring the weather, even when the weather is terrible. How does bad news trigger a reward?
Because dopamine is not actually the chemical of pleasure. It is the chemical of anticipation and resolution.
Resolution.
Yes. The brain craves resolution and certainty above almost all else. In a primal environment, ambiguity meant death.
Right. If you didn't know whether a rustle in the grass was the wind or a predator, you were in danger.
Exactly. Knowing for certain, even if it was a predator, allowed the brain to stop predicting and start acting. Monitoring the external surface today, constantly checking your status, obsessing over outcomes, agonizing over potential failures, provides the modern mind with the illusion of certainty.
So even if the news is terrible, your brain gets a covert reward, the dark satisfaction of knowing exactly where you stand. It resolves the ambiguity.
Precisely. It is a predictable feedback loop. You worry about a metric, you check the metric is bad, and your brain says, well, at least we know.
At least we know.
And that cycle of seeking certainty hijacks the lion's share of your cognitive bandwidth. Consider the magnitude of your spontaneous daily thoughts, the multitude of ideas that simply pop into your head without your conscious intent.
Yeah.
The overwhelming majority of those spontaneous thoughts are obsessively fixated on uncontrollable external conditions. What will they think of me? Will this project fail? What if the market shifts?
It is just a constant stream of hypothetical scenarios. And we think we're being responsible by thinking about them, don't we?
We do.
We call it planning or being realistic. But really, we're just feeding the addiction to certainty.
And every single one of those outcome-obsessed thoughts is actively draining the precise, vital energy you need to build the core foundation.
Wow.
Working memory is a finite resource. You are pouring your life force into a mirage. Imagine an athlete who spends every waking hour visualizing the championship trophy, stressing over past losses, obsessively checking the league standings, and arguing with the referees in their head.
Yeah, but they never actually set foot on the practice field to run drills.
Their chance of victory is absolute zero.
They are exhausted from the emotional labor of wanting the outcome, but they haven't done a single physical movement to earn it. The mental effort feels like physical effort, but it yields nothing.
Now contrast that with an athlete who completely ignores the championship. They never look at the standings. They never read the commentary. They simply show up every single day and relentlessly refine the microscopic mechanics of their physical movement.
They exist entirely in the foundation.
Exactly. Their likelihood of victory is astronomically higher, and paradoxically, they suffer far less anxiety. Desiring an outcome you cannot control inherently manufactures the exact suffering you were trying to escape.
That is a fascinating realization. The very act of desperately wanting to change your life and obsessing over the signs of that change is often the exact mechanism that makes your current life feel unbearable.
It creates the friction.
The tighter you grip the illusion of the weather, the more miserable you become and the less you actually build.
Yeah.
So what does this all mean for us functionally? How do we break the addiction to the weather and actually start building the climate?
It requires a fundamental shift in identity. You must transition from being a reactor to becoming an architect.
Let's draw a clear contrast here. What is the fundamental difference in how these two personas move through the world?
A reactor lives entirely tethered to circumstances. They are a prisoner of the weather. On bright sunny days, when the surface force is high and everything is going their way, the reactor feels a surge of unearned confidence.
They relax.
They coast. They assume the good weather is a permanent feature of the universe, so they stop preparing.
And when the storm rolls in,
Yeah.
let's say a major resource dries up, or they get a wave of harsh criticism.
Total systemic panic.
Yeah.
When the surface crashes, the reactor feels utterly defeated. They scramble frantically for a short-term tactical fix just to make the immediate emotional pain stop. They find a temporary Band-Aid, the weather neutralizes slightly, and they immediately go back to coasting.
Over a macro timeline, they expend colossal amounts of emotional energy reacting to the highs and lows, yet they end up in the exact same coordinates where they began.
It is a treadmill of alternating panic and complacency. You are running at a sprint, but the scenery never changes. But the architect...
The architect operates on a completely different frequency.
Yes. The architect displays a terrifying neutrality. Favorable conditions or challenging conditions do not alter their output by a solitary spark.
A glorious, triumphant day where everyone is singing their praises. They do the work.
A dark, humiliating day where nothing goes right. They do the exact same work. They do not chase quick emotional relief. They do not look for shortcuts to manipulate the weather. They focus entirely on the slow, deliberate layering of their internal foundation.
So let's get into the anatomy of that foundation. What exactly is the architect building in the dark? If we are ignoring the surface completely, what are the actual layers of this intrinsic value we are supposed to be cultivating?
There are 4 distinct compounding layers to the core foundation.
Okay, what's the first?
The first layer is frameworks.
Frameworks. So the map of the territory.
Yes. Frameworks are your intellectual understanding of strategies, principles, and rules. It is knowing the theory of how things work in your chosen domain.
So if you are a writer, it's understanding narrative structure.
Or if you are an entrepreneur, it's understanding resource flow and market dynamics. It is vital, absolutely. You need a map. But here is the tragedy.
What's that?
This is the layer where the overwhelming majority of people permanently stop.
Oh man, I see this constantly. Acquiring a map feels exactly like taking a journey if you aren't paying close attention.
It really does.
You read the philosophy, you study the strategy, you memorize the terminology, and your brain releases that sweet dopamine hit of certainty we talked about earlier. You feel like you've accomplished something substantial, even though all you've done is consume information.
But a map is completely useless if you lack the fortitude to walk into the wilderness. Frameworks on their own are fragile. They will instantly collapse under the pressure of reality.
Right.
If you only have theory, the first time the weather turns violent, the first time a real-world problem doesn't match the theory, you will abandon the map and run for shelter.
Which brings us to the necessity of the second layer. If the intellectual map isn't enough to sustain you, what goes beneath it?
The second layer is mindset, and we need to strip away the colloquial baggage of that word.
Yeah, it's gotten a bit cliche.
I do not mean this in the trivial motivational poster sense of having a positive attitude. Mindset is the invisible psychological capacity to execute your frameworks while enduring agonizing pressure.
Okay, so it's structural.
It is the neurological ability to regulate your nervous system so you can stay grounded, clear, and effective when the external circumstances are actively hostile.
It is the shock absorber.
Yeah.
It's the difference between knowing intellectually that a condition will fluctuate, that's the framework, and actually holding your nerve and not panicking when your personal resources are plummeting in real time.
Exactly. Without that shock absorber, your brilliant frameworks are utterly inaccessible to you when you need them most because your brain is in a fight-or-flight state.
Right.
Mindset dictates how you metabolize failure. A weak mindset views failure as an indictment of identity. A strong mindset views failure as neutral data. But even mindset requires an engine to drive it and test it.
And that is the third layer.
Yes, daily practice.
The daily practice, the relentless physical motion. This is where the theory has to translate into kinetic energy.
This is the non-negotiable engine room of your existence. It is the raw, physical actions you take regardless of your emotional state. It is not about talent or fleeting inspiration or optimal conditions.
It is the discipline of repetitive action.
Yes. The quality of your daily practice directly dictates the magnitude of your foundation's growth.
It's like planting an orchard in the dead of winter.
I love that image.
If you look at the surface, it is just a field of frozen, barren dirt. There is no fruit, there are no leaves. If a reactor walked by, they would look at the bare soil and say, "This is a failure. You've spent an endless tide of time out here in the freezing cold watering dirt, and you have absolutely nothing to show for it."
They think you were crazy.
Right. They might even point to a neighbor who went out and bought a plastic tree with fake apples glued to it and say, "Look at their success, look at their immediate harvest."
And that is the allure of the surface force in a nutshell. The fake tree always looks better in the winter.
But the architect knows that beneath that frozen crust of soil, something complex and miraculous is happening. The roots are expanding violently. They are navigating around rocks, anchoring deep into the bedrock.
Multiplying, searching for water.
Yeah, fortifying the base. To the outside world, it looks like nothing is happening. But you have to possess the sheer, uncompromising discipline to simply trust the math of the roots. You have to know that spring is a mathematical inevitability if the roots are healthy.
And to ensure those roots are healthy, you must accelerate them with the fourth and deepest layer.
The learning process.
The learning process. This is the ultimate meta skill. It is the foundation beneath the foundation.
The mechanism of how you learn to learn.
Exactly. It is how you absorb friction, how you identify your own cognitive biases, how you iterate, and how you refine your actions based on feedback.
Because most people don't do that.
Most people do not have a learning process at all. They simply consume raw information and pray that it sticks, or they repeat the exact same action for a passage of eras without ever analyzing their mistakes.
They throw seeds onto solid concrete.
But if you possess a rigorous mechanism for extracting truth from your daily practice, if you actively study your failures and adjust your approach, it acts as a massive accelerator for the other three layers.
It creates a self-feeding loop. A better learning process makes your daily practice more efficient. You stop making the same mistakes.
Right.
A more efficient daily practice hardens your mindset because you build resilience. A hardened mindset allows you to execute more complex frameworks. The roots grow deeper, faster, wider.
And when these four layers compound over a macro timeline, you reach a tipping point. Your intrinsic value becomes so massive, so undeniably dense, that the external world simply cannot ignore it anymore.
The reversion principle takes hold with the force of an avalanche.
Yes. The outcomes stop feeling like rare, lucky strikes of lightning and begin to feel like a quiet, inevitable math equation resolving itself. The climate finally dictates the weather.
But let's deal with the friction of human nature here. Because to build those four layers, to stand out in the freezing winter and tend to those invisible roots day after day without any immediate reward, you need a reason.
You absolutely do.
You need a unifying force to filter out the multitude of distractions and the constant allure of checking the weather.
You need a consuming purpose. And this is where we must confront the absolute toxicity of vague aspirations.
Wait, toxic? That sounds really counterintuitive.
How so?
Well, most people would say having an aspiration like, I want to find success, or I want to become a healthier person, or I want ultimate freedom, is a purely positive thing. It shows intent. How can a positive intention be toxic?
Because it provides the psychological comfort of having a direction without demanding a single ounce of specific action today.
Ah, I see.
A vague goal is a pacifier for the ego. The statement, I want to be healthier, does not tell you what you must physically do at dawn tomorrow morning. I want freedom does not dictate what specific asset you will build this afternoon.
It allows you to feel like you are on a journey while you are standing perfectly still. You can endlessly debate the nuances of success with your friends. You can read books about health, all without ever risking the vulnerability of actual failure.
You get the identity of a seeker without the cost of the pursuit.
Right. So if vague aspirations are a trap that just feeds the ego, how do we locate a purpose sharp enough to cut through the noise and force action?
Through what we can call the discovery protocol. It begins not by looking up at the clouds for inspiration or waiting for a muse, but by looking down at the raw, unglamorous data of your own daily existence.
Looking at your actual life.
Yes, you must track your raw, unfiltered attention. For a designated cycle of time, you simply observe where your mind naturally drifts when it is not being forced by external obligations.
You're looking for the signal in the static. Like, what do you naturally read about when no one is watching? What problems do you naturally try to solve?
Exactly. And even more powerfully, you must track your greatest recurring frustrations.
Frustration.
Yes. The things that genuinely bother you, the recurring friction points in your life, the systems you look at and think, this is broken, this shouldn't be this way, that is where the energy is trapped.
Oh, that's
The
interesting.
signal of your purpose is very often hidden inside your deepest irritation. Frustration is just a mismatch between your expectation of how the world should be and how it currently is.
So you observe the raw data of your life, you identify the recurring theme of your attention or your frustration, and then you have to translate that theme into something functional.
It must be translated into an outcome bounded by a fixed cycle of time, a defined, unbreakable window, a season of complete, absolute focus.
It cannot be open-ended.
Human beings are neurologically incapable of pursuing an open-ended abstraction with daily intensity. There must be a horizon line to force prioritization.
And it has to be brutally specific, right? Not, I will be a better creator, but I will complete this specific project of this exact scope by the end of this designated season. If you can't measure it, you can't manage the daily practice.
Precisely. But even a specific, measurable goal will crumble if the root cause driving it is shallow. You must subject your goal to the chain of whys.
The interrogation of the motive. Walk us through how that actually works in practice.
Most people's stated reasons for wanting something are entirely superficial. They are socially acceptable masks designed to sound good in a conversation.
Right.
Someone says, I want to build this project to gain freedom. You ask, why do you want freedom? They respond, to control my time. You ask, why do you need to control your time?
And you have to keep drilling down. You have to keep asking why until the answer stops sounding like a sanitized motivational poster and starts sounding like a raw, uncomfortable personal truth.
It must survive the interrogation until you hit bedrock. Perhaps the real answer, several levels down, is because I am afraid of looking back at the end of my journey and realizing I never met my own potential, and the shame of being ordinary is unbearable to me. That is a reason with fangs. A superficial reason, like controlling my time, will completely evaporate on a dark, freezing morning when your motivation is gone. A raw, uncomfortable truth about your own fear or ambition will physically drag you out of bed.
But let me play devil's advocate here for a second.
Go for it.
If I actually do this, if I lock myself into one singular, brutally specific path for an entire season, and I tie it to a deep personal truth, isn't the opportunity cost terrifying?
How so?
Well, what if I am working obsessively on this one project, and I miss out on a massive, unexpected opportunity that just floats by? What if I pick the wrong goal and completely waste the season?
That anxiety is a cognitive illusion.
Any illusion.
Yes, the truth of human behavior is that any focused, uncompromising action generates infinitely more truth than an endless tide of contemplation.
Let me just repeat that because that is profound.
Yeah.
Any focused action generates infinitely more truth than contemplation.
Always.
You cannot steer a ship that is sitting still in the harbor. You have to be moving to know if the direction is right.
Exactly. When you commit to a singular mission for a defined season, the anxiety of missing out is structurally crowded out by the sheer intensity of the work.
Because you're too busy.
An idle mind has the infinite capacity to manufacture hypothetical regrets. It has excess working memory to dedicate to worrying. A mind completely consumed by a defined mission literally lacks the cognitive bandwidth to obsess over what-ifs.
You do not conquer the fear of missing out by thinking your way out of it.
You conquer it by replacing the vacuum of your attention with undeniable forward momentum.
It is the ultimate antidote to fragmentation. When you are fragmented, your energy bleeds out in a vast constellation of different directions, and you feel constantly anxious because nothing is moving forward. You are busy but stagnant.
But when you condense all that scattered light through a single magnifying glass, it generates fire. You narrow the aperture.
And that fire is what you need. Because the initial burst of inspiration, that beautiful romantic feeling of starting a new mission, will inevitably die. It always dies.
Huh.
The midnight motivation is a spark, not a fuel source.
Which brings us to the operational reality of all this.
Right, the day-to-day.
How do we execute when the romance fades? How do we keep building the climate when the weather inside our own minds turns dark and cold and the novelty of the goal has completely worn off?
We have to completely eradicate the myth of motivation.
Yes, we absolutely do.
The idea that feeling ready or inspired is a prerequisite for action.
It is the most destructive behavioral lie we tell ourselves. We have been conditioned by modern culture to believe that action is the downstream result of an emotion, that you must feel inspired to build, that you must feel energized to move, that you must feel confident to speak.
We treat emotion as a leading indicator.
But if your action relies on your mood, your output becomes as violently unstable as a storm. You are essentially delegating your future to the whims of your internal weather.
You are saying, I will only build my foundation if the neurochemistry in my brain happens to be perfectly aligned today.
Exactly. The architect understands that action must be completely divorced from emotion. Emotion is a lagging indicator. It often follows the action rather than preceding it.
So how do we actually do that?
To achieve that divorce between mood and execution, you must establish the sacred minimum,
The floor.
the absolute floor. A daily requirement so elemental, so stripped down, that it can be completed on your absolute worst, most exhausted, most demoralized day.
And this is where people trip up so often.
Oh, constantly.
Because we usually set our daily goals for our best selves. We visualize the version of us that rested perfectly, saw a beautiful sunrise, and feels utterly invincible. We build massive, complex daily requirements for that fictional superhero.
Right.
But we don't need a system for our best selves. Our best selves are fine. They will naturally do the work. We need to design our minimum for our absolute worst selves. The version of us that is bone-tired, cranky, overwhelmed, and just wants to hide under a heavy blanket and disappear.
That is the exact persona the minimum must be designed for. The sacred minimum is not a compromise. It is an impenetrable fortress. If your minimum requirement takes a huge block of intense cognitive focus to complete, it is not a minimum.
A true minimum can be done in a mere fragment of your day, regardless of the external or internal circumstances.
Yes.
But I have to ask the obvious question here. Does doing something so infinitesimally small actually build a foundation? If my goal is to build a massive project and my sacred minimum is laying a single tiny piece, doesn't that feel like a psychological trick? It feels like cheating. How does one tiny piece build a climate?
Because you paired the floor with the ceiling. The minimum is the floor, the non-negotiable baseline requirement. The ceiling is the optional extension for days when you possess an abundance of energy. On a great day, you soar to the ceiling. You build a massive section.
But the structural power lies entirely in the floor.
Yes.
Yeah.
The sacred minimum does something profound neurologically. It removes the agonizing daily negotiation. You wake up exhausted, and the mind starts to debate, should I do this today? Maybe I can skip just one day. I'll make it up tomorrow. That negotiation drains your willpower before you even begin to work.
Oh, decision fatigue. The mere act of deciding whether or not to work consumes the energy needed to actually do the work.
Yeah,
But if the minimum is sacred, the debate is instantly silenced.
exactly.
You say, I don't have to be great today. I don't have to reach the ceiling. I don't even have to be good, but I am going to touch the floor. The minimum keeps the chain unbroken. It keeps the habit loop anchored, preserving the identity of someone who does the work, even if the progress is just a tiny fragment.
It maintains the neurological wiring. But we must be fiercely realistic about human fragility here.
Yeah.
Disruptions are an inescapable feature of existence. You will eventually face a day where even the sacred minimum is missed. A true crisis occurs. Severe illness strikes. The chain breaks.
And that is usually the exact moment the reactor gives up entirely. The streak is broken, the perfect record is ruined, so the identity is shattered, and they abandon the project altogether.
Which is why the ultimate metric of a resilient foundation is not maintaining a flawless, unbroken streak of perfection. Perfection is a fragile, brittle illusion.
So what's the metric?
The true metric of mastery is the skill of the fast return.
The speed of the rebound, how quickly you can arrest the slide.
Precisely. It is about minimizing the gap of time between the failure and the resumption of the minimum. A single missed day is a tiny data point. It means absolutely nothing over a macro timeline.
Right.
But a missed season, a prolonged absence, that begins to rot the foundation. The architect does not agonize over the broken streak. They simply execute the fast return.
But this is where our own psychology sabotages us again, and I really want to talk about this. When we miss a day, when we fail our own standard, we feel a profound sense of guilt. And culturally, we assume that this guilt is a noble thing.
We do.
We think we are holding ourselves accountable by feeling terrible about our failure. We think if I feel bad, it proves I care.
That is perhaps the most insidious behavioral trap of all. Guilt is not accountability. Guilt is a highly sophisticated form of avoidance.
Wait, that sounds like an excuse to just be lazy and avoid consequences.
Mhm.
How is feeling bad about a failure not holding yourself accountable? If I mess up and don't feel guilty, doesn't that make me reckless regarding my own goals?
Let's examine the function of the emotion rather than the moral judgment of it. As long as you are wallowing in guilt, you are not required to take constructive action.
Oh.
Wallowing requires an immense amount of emotional energy, and it makes you feel like you are doing something profound. Your brain says, look how much I care. Look how much I am suffering for my failure.
But the suffering is completely passive.
It is a protective shell. It delays the uncomfortable, humbling reality of simply starting again from zero.
Oh, that is sharp. It is the ego protecting itself.
Mm.
If I'm busy punishing myself emotionally, I don't have to face the humility of picking up the smallest brick and performing my tiny, unglamorous sacred minimum. The drama of the guilt replaces the quiet dignity of the work.
The fast return demands that you bypass the luxury of guilt. You acknowledge the miss as a neutral data point. You say, I missed the minimum yesterday. You do not dramatize it.
You don't construct a sprawling narrative about your inherent character flaws or your inevitable destiny of failure.
You simply perform the minimum today. You return to the foundation without fanfare.
It is a radical act of self-forgiveness disguised as raw discipline. You are refusing to let the weather of your past failure dictate the climate of your present action. You treat the failure like a pothole, not a cliff.
And as you relentlessly execute the sacred minimum, as you master the skill of the fast return, as you ignore the surface and tend to the roots, something miraculous begins to happen at the very core of your psychology.
What happens?
You undergo a fundamental identity shift.
This is the ultimate destination, isn't it? The transformation from someone who hopes to achieve something to someone who simply knows who they are.
Our society is heavily obsessed with the concept of manifesting confidence. We are instructed to stand in front of mirrors and repeat affirmations, to forcefully visualize our success, to simply decide to be confident through sheer force of will.
But true, unshakable confidence is not a mood you can just summon.
Because it's not the weather. You can't just wish for sunshine.
No. Confidence is the downstream effect of undeniable evidence.
Yes.
I want to highlight that because it shifts the entire paradigm. Confidence is the downstream effect of undeniable evidence. You cannot trick your own mind into believing a reality that simply doesn't exist.
Your subconscious is keeping a meticulous, permanent ledger of every promise you make to yourself. Every time you declare a massive midnight intention and fail to execute it the next morning, you make a withdrawal from your self-trust account.
And over time,
with an endless tide of broken promises, that account goes bankrupt. You fundamentally stop believing your own words. When you say, I will do this, your subconscious quietly replies, no, you won't. We have the data.
But the reverse mechanism is also true, and that is where the power lies.
Yes. When you commit to the sacred minimum, and you actually execute it day after day, regardless of the weather, when you accumulate a vast history of tiny, kept promises, you are making deposits of undeniable evidence.
You are generating a mountain of proof that you are someone who follows through.
And proof is the only currency the brain respects. You don't have to hype yourself up anymore. You don't need a surge of adrenaline. You just look at the mountain of evidence you have quietly built in the dark, and your self-concept transforms.
You transition from someone who is frantically trying to become disciplined to someone who simply is disciplined. The internal friction dissolves. You no longer hope to succeed. You no longer pray for the right conditions. You quietly, calmly expect to succeed because you trust the unyielding math of your own foundation.
It alters your baseline reality. It changes how you carry yourself. It changes how you walk into a room. It changes how you respond to an external catastrophe.
Because the foundation is so thick, so dense with empirical evidence of your own resilience, that panic simply cannot penetrate it. You know you can survive the storm because you built the shelter yourself.
You have become the architect of your own climate.
Which leads us to a final thought to examine. Something that flips our conventional understanding of what we are all actually searching for.
What's that?
Well, we spend our lives deeply craving freedom. We want freedom from anxiety, freedom from stagnation, freedom from the expectations of others. And we are constantly sold the narrative that true freedom is found in having open-ended choices.
Right.
The freedom to do whatever we want, whenever we want, dictated purely by how we feel in the moment. No rules, no constraints.
That is the ultimate illusion of the reactor, the belief that absence of structure equals presence of freedom.
Exactly. But what if ultimate freedom isn't found in having a multitude of open tabs and endless flexibility? What if the most profound form of human liberation is actually found on the exact opposite side of the spectrum?
I believe it is.
What if freedom is only found on the other side of radical, obsessive, uncompromising discipline?
When you remove the endless daily negotiation, when you bind yourself to a singular consuming purpose, when you lock into the sacred minimum, you are not restricting your freedom.
You are actually liberating your working memory from the exhausting tyranny of your own fleeting moods. You are freeing yourself from the burden of constantly deciding who you are going to be today.
You are building a fortress against the storm.
So the question you have to ask yourself as you look at your own scattered desk, as you look at the vast constellation of open tabs in your life, is this. What happens when you finally stop obsessing over the unpredictable wind and you just start steering by the stars? What happens when you finally stop watching the weather and start becoming the climate?